Welcome to the Fighting on Film podcast, the podcast all about classic and obscure war movies, from the Normandy landings to the days of chivalry and swords. If it's been captured on film, we're going to try and cover it. I'm Robbie of RM Military History.
I'm Matthew Moss of Historical Firearms and the Armourer's Bench.
Welcome back to Fighting on Film. Now, last week and the start of this week has been huge for the war genre. Not only did we get the BBC premiere of their new SAS Rogue Hero series, see last week's episode for a preview if you haven't already seen it, but on the 28th, Netflix dropped their new adaptation of Erich Remarque's seminal novel, All Quiet on the Western Front. Maybe two of the biggest related media drops of the year, coming in within a week of each other. Well, unless you count Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. Matt, you saw it, didn't you, at the cinema?
I did. I was super lucky that one of the 5 cinemas in the UK was within an hour of me in Manchester. So I got to see it.
Only 5 in the whole country?
Yeah. When I looked at listings, there was only like maybe 5-6 regions that had a cinema that was showing it.
Wow.
I went down. It was in a tiny, like 25-30 seat screen. And it was remarkable. I'm so glad that I went to see it on a proper big screen and get that full experience, because it blew me away. We have criticisms and we have a lot to talk about in this episode.
Yes.
But visually, it blew me away.
Yeah, visually it's a treat. It's a feast for the eyes. It really is. And I think we'll come back to that a few times during the show. I saw it at home on Netflix because it was an instant sort of, I think it's a worldwide drop.
Yeah, I think so.
But, yeah, maybe you should just get straight into the production, Matt, of it.
Sure. So it was directed by Edward Berger, who's a German director, best known for doing a number of episodes of Deutschland 83, the popular series. He's also done The Terror, which is like an anthology series, a bit of a horror thing. You might have seen that too. He did Patrick Melrose with Benedict Cumberbatch a couple of years ago, and then his most recent work, other than this, is Your Honor with Bryan Cranston, where he's a judge and his son accidentally kills someone in a hit-and-run accident, and so it all unravels from there. It's quite good,
I think I've seen the trailer for that, yeah.
And at the moment, I'm quite excited to find out that he's actually working on a new adaptation of The 39 Steps with Benedict Cumberbatch for Netflix, so that sounds really promising.
Oh, that does sound good.
I noted in a couple of online articles, Roger Donaldson was attached originally to direct rather than Berger,
right?
Which I thought was interesting. I don't know how correct that is. It would have been a very different film, I think. The screenplay was written by Berger, Ian Stockel, and Leslie Patterson, and obviously it's based on Erich Maria Remarque's seminal work, All Quiet on the Western Front. Remarque was a conscript in 1917, served with the 15th Reserve Infantry Regiment, and was badly wounded by shrapnel and invalided home. This is the 3rd adaptation of the film. So we had one in 1939 by Louis Milestone, and then we had a 1970, I believe it was 9 adaptation. Yeah. This was released, as Rob mentioned, on Netflix, and it was produced by Amusement Park. It was edited by Sven Bundelmann, who had worked with Berger on Deutschland 83 and lots of other TV. And I just wanted to mention also this week, the music was by Volker Bertelmann, who has done work on Hotel Mumbai, Gunpowder, I think it was 2017 show that looked at the gunpowder plot.
Was that BBC? I think I remember that.
I think it was, yeah, with what's his name? Kit
Harington.
Harrington, that's it. Yeah.
Right. No, the soundtrack is phenomenal in this. Like the industrial beats with the classic mixed in. It's really
something. Is it a harmonium? I think it might be a harmonium or something like that, with those really powerful, deep, like 3 notes that become a motif from the very beginning of the film all the way through. We'll talk more about it, I'm sure.
Really powerful.
Remarkable. Brilliant. It's Germany's submission to the 95th Academy Awards next year for Best International Feature Film. And
early buzz is that it's going to win it. The early buzz is very high.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a big list, international film, but it's definitely strong.
Yes.
And then finally, cinematography was by James Friend, a British cinematographer who's worked on the BBC's The Musketeers, HBO. I think it was HBO's The War of the Worlds adaptation. He's worked with Berger on Patrick Melrose and Your Honor, and he's currently working on one of the new Star Wars series, Acolyte.
Oh, that one. Right, okay. That's yet to be released, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the works right now.
Yeah, more
And
bloody
that rounds
Star
out
Wars.
production.
Christ. Yeah.
It's the golden age, Rob.
Yeah, because it's so close to production, there isn't that much floating around out there, is there, yet? I don't
Budget
think.
is completely undisclosed,
Yeah.
so we don't really know about that, but it certainly seems to have been healthy.
Well, it's Netflix. They don't... Well, I think they're going to start, but they don't exactly give out their stats yet, do they?
And we'll never know how many people saw it.
Oh, God, no, I don't think
because they never tell anyone.
No, they don't. But, the fact it's been submitted to the Oscars is probably high praise enough, really.
I think it's done well on the awards circuit, the preview circuit, and the film festivals and such.
No, I think you're right. So moving on to the cast, and then we'll get some of your the listeners' views. So the cast is made up of a lot of actors who won't be well known outside of Germany or to Western audiences. But the main protagonist, Paul Baumer, he's played by Felix Kammerer, and he's Austrian. He's a theatre actor mainly, and this is his first featuring credit. His only role, other than this, of any film role, is a 1998 film called David in Wonderland, where he would have been 3 years old in that. I think he played a small child in it. But this is his first feature.
I think he would have done, yes.
And they were saying about casting him that he came back, and every time that he came back, he just gave more emotion, more raw performance, and they knew this was going to be their Paul. And I do agree. I think he gives such a nuanced, emotional performance. He's got this very natural way of acting where he doesn't have to put on the melodramatics. It's all through the face. There's a very theatre side of his acting, I think. He's not
Right.
come from a tradition. For me, at least, just watching as someone who did acting for a tiny bit of their life, it feels like he's learnt it from the theatre side first, coming over to film, rather than film and going over to theatre. And he's fantastic. Then we have Albrecht Schuch. He plays Stanislas Kat Kaczynski. He's known for his work inside Germany. He's got a breakout role in a film called Measuring the World in 2012, where he played Alexander von Humboldt. And then he played the painter Otto Modersohn in Christian Schwarzschau's Paula in 2016, and he was the director of Munich, Edge of War, that we covered a few months back.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a nice little connection there. Then we have Aaron Hilmer as Albert Krupp. He's another German. He played David in a 2020 Netflix series called Slurborn, which is like this pandemic on an island, and it's like a thriller type thing. I think it did well because at the time it came out, COVID was starting, so I think it captured that in a way that it didn't mainly intend to. But he's done lots of German TV work. Then we have Edin Hasanovic. He plays Tjaden Stackfleet. He's a Bosnian actor, but he's mainly worked on German TV. He was in a film called 2012 Shifting the Blame, which he was nominated for a German Film Award, a German Film Critics Award, and then he was in a series in 2016 called Family Brown, where he played a neo-Nazi, and he won a German TV Award for Best Actor in that. Then we have Mortis Klaus as Franz Müller. He's known for his German TV roles, and he was in a series called Leipzig Homicide, which is a German police procedural. Rounding out the boys, we have Adrian Grunwald. He plays Ludwig Bem. He starred in Slowborn with Aaron, and he also played Samuel in a 2020 miniseries called Labyrinth of Peace, which is set in post-war Switzerland, which did sound quite good, actually.
Oh, interesting.
Then we have Daniel Brühl playing Matthias Erzberger. He was the one of the men who signed the peace treaty, and then he was I think he was Minister of Finance in the 20s.
Social Democrat, yeah.
Yeah. He was best known, he'll be the best known actor in this to Western audiences because he was Zola in Inglourious Bastards, in the MCU as Zemo in Captain America Civil War, and the Falcon the Winter Soldier. But my favourite role of his is his portrayal of Niki Lauda in Rush, if you've seen that.
Oh, yeah, he's great in that.
Really good in that. And he's probably the biggest name in this. And I know early on his name was attached, and I was like, is he going to play Cat? Because he's too old to play Paul. I worried that...
We did wonder.
I wondered they were going to pin him as, okay, we can't do this movie and not have a big name. But he gets used in a good way, but I'm going to explain why I don't think it's good later on. Because it takes some explaining.
Yeah.
Then we have Thibault D. I'm going to butcher this French surname, sorry. Montalembert plays Foch. And he's a French actor known for the sitcom Call My Agent, which was huge over lockdown. I remember it becoming quite popular, and now I think Netflix are making an English version of it. And he also appeared...
Well, it's got to be better than a Netflix dub, hasn't it?
Well, God, yeah, we'll mention that. And he also appeared in the 2006 film Days of Glory, which is the one about North African Free French soldiers, which I do quite like.
Oh, we need to cover that one, yeah.
Yeah, we do. And then we have David Streisau as General Fredericks. He was Sturmbannführer Herzog in 2007's The Counterfeiters that won Best Foreign Film in the 2008 Academy Awards, which I semi-remember watching, I think.
I haven't seen that one.
On TV once before. It did ring a bell. And that's your main cast. There's only a few characters of any real merit in there.
Well, we'll definitely talk a bit more about that, yeah.
Everyone else is either just in it for a few lines or they're not in it at all. I think this one really slimlines the cast down to its bare bones. It really does.
Oh, yeah.
And even then it leaves things like characterisation and arcs very slim. It wasn't something that I think was at the forefront of this adaptation, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, it's purposely utilitarian in that respect, definitely.
Very streamlined. And even to the fact of that I couldn't pick apart the boys at some points because they just didn't do enough for me to go, that's that person, that's that person.
It narrows it down to like 4. And yes, I know what you mean there.
Even Cat is woefully underused.
Until the very end,
Until the very end.
Until they really develop him in a fairly short space of time. But I like the actor. I think he did a good job.
Fabulous. They're all doing a really good job. And Felix is a breakout star. I mean, hopefully he's going to go on to be a really great German export actor-wise, because he's got plenty of great roles in him. You can see it. So instead of a one-word review this week, we thought we would talk about some of our listeners' thoughts, because I put a tweet out on the day of release saying, has anybody seen it yet? So I will just pick out some. There. Lester Bandido, he said, found it rather cold. War scenes utterly gruesome. Characters may be lost in translation. A sense of comradeship through it, but loose. Worth a watch though. Then we had Paul Kelly, saw it on release in the cinema. Very different from other versions that I'm familiar with. He has made me want to read the book. Visually it's superb and you get the references to the Second World War, but not sure it's as good as the other versions. And rounding us out, we had Tom McCall. He said, very mixed views, stunning, shocking battle scenes, some incredibly powerful emotional moments, but overall there's little substance, story or character development.
Yeah, we had a lot of people talking about that throughout that Twitter post that you did. Do follow us at Fighting on Film as well. We do a lot of posting over there. Also on other social media as well, Facebook, Instagram, etc.
It's a great way to get involved with the show every week.
Twitter is always a great place to get involved and chat with us. I agree with a lot of that. There's a lot there that is very true and is on the nose. I think there's more nuance to it than some people have realised, and I think there's reasons why the characterization is so stunted in places. But we'll talk about that more in a moment.
Yeah.
Should we move on to the alley tally?
It's time for Alley Tally on Fighting on Film.
With the alley tally, and seasoned listeners will know that this is where we discuss all the interesting and cool kit that is on the show throughout the film. There's a lot here. And it feels very authentic from the uniforms and the weapons on show. Germans have got Gewehr 98s. The French have Berthiers. There's lots of Maxim MG08 action. We get a little bit of some French Hotchkiss gun during one of the attacks, and there's a brilliant over-the-shoulder shot of the French machine gunners cutting down the attacking Germans, and that's a lovely parallel to not only the 1970s version but also the 30s version. There's some shots that I feel have to be done in a certain way.
Echo. Yeah. Because there's that sequence in the 30s version where you get the machine gun and you cut to like the line of French guys being cut down. That echoes that a little bit there in that sequence.
I think there's only a certain number of ways you can actually portray that in an impactful way, and I think that is the classic, but it works so well. Yeah,
it's such an iconic thing when you think of the First World War. It's machine guns. They're always brought in, and in the media of World War One as well. You can't have a First World War movie without having machine guns in it at some point. So it is dealt with quite nicely. And respectfully as well. I don't think this is war for war's sake. It's not... What's the word? It's not glorifying, I don't think.
No, it is. It's purposeful.
That's the word, yeah.
And we'll talk about this in a moment, but rounding out the firearms on show, we actually see a 1873 Chamelot Delvin revolver in the French officer's hands towards the end, and also a French Ruby pistol, semi-automatic.
Oh, is that what that is? That's nice.
Yeah, they were ubiquitous. They were one of the French most used sidearms, and they were just cheap little semi-automatic pistols that were made often in Spain.
Right.
And you don't see them very often in film.
That's nice.
And that's what, spoilers, of course, it's a spoiler review.
Yeah.
Paul struggles with one of the French towards the end of the film to try and grab this ruby, and it's kind of like it's shot. That shot is classic fight.
Yeah,
over a pistol
very
shot.
cliche over a
pistol
trophy.
in the foreground, fights in the background, scrambling.
Paul's being nearly drowned, and there's the perfect rock placement so you can grab it.
Yeah.
Chekhov's rock, sitting over there. But no, everything is purposeful and dealt with well, because the trailer I think really overdid it, or I was expecting them to overdo the sequences with the flamethrowers. Because the trailer makes that look like a much longer sequence than it is, but it's only maybe a couple of minutes.
It does, and it almost feels like the trailer stacks them as being everywhere. Whereas in the film, there's a little bit more space between what's going on. So it seemed like a wall of flame, but really what's happening is, and I think from what I've been reading, is it's a fairly good representation of flamethrower use, because the flamethrower is mentioned in the book, and in both I think it's in both adaptations. I can't remember whether it's in the 1930s one. It's been a couple of years since I've seen it, and we'll mention both versions throughout this, but we're not going to do direct comparisons because I think that'd be actually something fun to come back and do with perhaps a guest.
I think it's a little bit unfair on some level as well, because every single director who makes an adaptation is putting their own mark on it as well, and it's made for the audience of that time. So exactly, there must have been people in the 70s being like, "This isn't like Lewis Milestone's version. You can't."
Oh,
what are you doing?
I would imagine so.
So
yeah, that's a good
this
point.
whole fervency over adaptations, I think is. I'll come back to it later, but I personally think if you're doing an adaptation, and this is just me, I think you could be as loose as you wish, because you'll make at some level you are making your own piece of art as well. So it just depends what you're being influenced by. But that's just me. But getting back to the kit and stuff,
But just to finish off that point, before I went on a massive tangent, the flamethrowers, they seem to appear in like the second or third wave of the French advance, which is in keeping, I believe, with how French use the flamethrowers. Right, okay. The first line will be rifle and bomb armed troops, and then it will be flamethrowers to follow up and clear bunkers and stuff. And that definitely seems to be what's being portrayed in the film.
Yeah.
And of course, we can't really talk about Ali Tali without mentioning the Saint-Chamons.
Oh,
they are incredible to see.
Yeah, it's incredible to see them, and to see any sort of French tank really, because we see a lot of. You think of tanks in the First World War, your mind goes to Mark I's, male and female.
Mark IVs.
Mark IVs, yeah, they're iconic. Maybe a Whippet tank if you're lucky. French
FTs have appeared in a few films.
Yeah, they have. But to get a Charmande is incredible. And I think they're built on BMP chassis.
Yes.
But the mock-up's fantastic. I'm not sure who's responsible for that, but they're just used that's well.
One of the things I tried to find out when I was looking into production side of things, I couldn't even find a historical advisor for the film.
Wow.
And there must have been one, because
yeah, of course.
It's it wouldn't be half the film it is without some historical
not at all.
accuracy in some of the sort of points it hits. But the fact that they went for a practical tank, and then I think some CGI for the others in the background, but it just works really well.
There's a lot of in-camera in this, actually, which is really nice.
There is. We'll talk about the tank sequence, I think, in more detail in a moment. But there was also a couple of things that were missing for me. I thought it was interesting. Not that they needed to be in there, but there were no stormtroopers with their MP-18s.
No, there wasn't anything
obviously,
like that.
by this point in the war, a lot of them had been killed.
Yes, true.
They were still around. No MG08-15s.
No.
Light machine guns. Again, you could put that down to them being with the stormtrooper.
True.
But there were no Tigerwehr, the anti-tank rifles.
Oh, yeah, you think they would
hefty anti-tank rifles.
Well, I thought that was just because in that sequence they've attacked that trench line, they've taken it, they're attempting to reinforce it and defend it, and then they get swamped too quickly and all their secondary stuff hasn't come up yet. That's what I thought.
Quite possibly.
That sequence was representing, yeah. Mm-hmm. But it's nice to see that sequence of attack, counter-attack, retreat. It's its own little way showing the sort of how we imagine the Western Front war in the Western Front to be like, you know.
And I think the previous adaptations of the book have a lot to do with how we perceive that fighting on the Western Front, because that's very much characterized in the 1930 version of the film, attack, retreat, attack. But basically, I think the adaptation of the book initially has a lot to do with how later films have portrayed the actual war as well. I think it's definitely a touchstone for a lot of films that followed it.
No, I think you're right. For now as well, how we look back at the First World War, it's more than any other conflict I can think of. It's one that we have this sort of, it was horrific, it was mud, it was blood, it was innocent boys being sent into this mechanical machine to be churned up and spat out. This one for me feels like that more than 1917, more than any other post-99 90s adaptations of the First World War I can think of off the top of my head now. But for me, this one is a lot more in a sort of non-tropey sense.
Yeah, maybe. There's elements of the classic understanding of the conflict definitely in there, but it's not trying to go for... It doesn't feel overtly tropey.
No, and it's not overtly romantic either, I think.
God, no.
No. It's not trying to batter you over the head to make you care about these characters as much as 1917 did for me. Whereas I think, spoilers for 1917, but when the small chap gets bayoneted, if it gets knifed in the middle, that's trying to pull at your heartstrings, being like, oh, he's so young, and oh, he died for nothing, died trying to be kind and all that. But whereas this one is, war's horrible, people do horrible things, because they have to, it's kill or be killed. And that's what I felt that this movie's trying to get through to the viewer, is that humans intrinsically aren't meant to do this, but it is something that we have in ourselves that we can do, but then we can learn from it. We have to go forward. I got this whole thing of going forward, not only in a attack sense, but when they're talking about like how it's going to be after the war, I felt like this whole theme of going into the future better and learning from it. But then I think Kat says, we're going to be time travelers in a landscape of the past, and that really, that might be the bad translation, but that stuck with me because I was thinking, these people that have fought this war are never going to be the same, and that's how I felt this movie presented view of the war. Yeah, and they got a bit off topic there, but
that part is probably where it challenged Remarque the most, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. It does. That's where the themes come through a lot more, because there's a whole swathe of this film that we'll get back to that.
Well, that's a great moment to move into our favourite scenes, I think.
Hello, Robbie here. Did you know you can support the podcast on Patreon? Join the supporting cast today and gain access to exclusive perks, such as discount codes, our monthly Patreon film votes, and the chance to get exclusive merchandise before anyone else. Search Fighting on Film on Patreon or find the link on our website. Thank you. Now back to the show. So Matt, your favourite scene this week?
I'm going to go for the opening. I loved the opening. I mean, loved is probably the wrong word there, but I was really struck by the way the film opened. It begins with a stark forest, autumnal, cold, tonally very blue and cold, beautiful, really nicely shot. And then we get this little sequence of a fox with their cubs. And maybe it was just me imagining it, but it sounds like there's rumbling in the distance.
Yeah.
And that's either gunfire or that is the foreboding.
It's like thunder before a storm. Coming. Yeah, that's what I got.
Exactly. And then we get this powerful, again, foreboding score that builds and has this, I think it's 3-note theme where it's like boom, boom, boom. And it's so gut shaking. It grabs you. It's
like a mechanical sort of march, like trudge type sound. Yeah.
It feels almost like it's unstoppable.
Yes, that's it.
Like an unstoppable force.
It's like a horror score, isn't it? Almost. Yeah.
It's like an organic Zimmer score.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like without having like the overused thwomp sounds.
Yeah, it's not that. No, it isn't that. Yeah, but it feels like it. Yeah.
Yeah, it feels very primal, I think.
That's it.
And then we move into this absolutely visceral nightmare of a battle. And you think, is this Paul? We have this brilliant tracking shot of a chap running. Begins in the trench, and then he's running through no man's land. I think his name's Heydrich, or because he gets called a number of times, so you find out that he's not Paul, and you're wondering, why are we following this chap? There's a very gritty, visceral, almost appalling battle going on.
Yeah. He takes his shovel out and he runs at a French guy and it cuts.
He does. Right. Yeah, that's right. But he's killed. And we see this processing of the dead. Bodies are being buried. There's blood on the floor. They're putting boxes into a mass grave.
Yeah.
And then they take the uniforms from the men that have been killed and they process those.
Patch them
They wash them. The blood from the uniforms pours across the floor in the laundry. And then we cut to this factory floor where there's dozens and dozens and dozens of women working at sewing machines, sewing little cloth patches over shrapnel holes, bullet holes, onto all these tunics and trousers and other elements of uniform. And it's this salvaging of uniforms then feeds into the first time we see Paul become a soldier, because he's at the enlistment center where he turns up and hands over his papers, and he gets handed a bundle of clothes, uniform, and he stops as he's walking away and he goes, "Oh, these belong to someone," and he turns back to the processing officer who just rips the tag off the uniform, and he says, "Oh, it must have been sent back. It was too small," or something like that.
That's it.
And then he just drops it on the floor, and on the floor by his feet is a small pile of labels that he's ripped off.
It's such an affecting little sequence, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That whole sequence itself could just be a short film about war.
Because the machine of war, the cog of war, the sort of never-endingness of it. But I thought, just to quickly jump in there, it was that one of the few sequences in a war film that I think where you see like the burial detail.
Yeah.
The aftermath
And
of
the
battle.
uniforms, the processing of the uniforms.
Things like that.
Never seen that
Logistics-wise,
before.
you don't get that. It's a nice, really nice little glimpse into.
It's a really interesting montage of them being taken from the dead, thrown in bundles onto a train, being washed, being repaired, being handed back over to the next group of men that are about to go into the same meat grinder.
Yeah. Wearing dead man's clothes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
wearing dead man's clothes.
Yeah.
And I thought it was very powerful. I was really struck by that.
Yeah, that opening is really good. And then I feel like it almost goes too quick and then stops. But we'll get onto that later.
Yeah, we need to talk about timeline for it, obviously.
Yeah, we do.
Because there's some changes there. But before we do that, what was your favourite scene?
So my favourite scene was, there's the section with the Charmant tanks where they beat them away and then they start retreating. And that comes after a really visceral, brutal trench clearance scene where Paul is killing people with entrenching tools. His friends are going through a trench, clearing it, a Frenchman shooting them point blank range. Grenades. It's some of the best trench fighting sequence I've seen in a movie that gets the closeness of it all. And the soundscape of it is really overwhelming and it doesn't stop, it's relentless. And then, so this makes sense. So, to talk about that sequence first. So, Paul's then going away and he's retreating and he gets into a shell hole and he's trying to act dead, but he's got his knife in his hand and he turns around and sees a French soldier aiming a rifle at him, a Frenchman. And there's an explosion and the Frenchman falls into the crater and Paul instinctively runs over to him and engages him in a fight and Paul stabs him 8 times, 12 times in the heart.
Yeah.
And it's very up close. You see it all. It's like a mid-shot. This is in the 1979 version, I think in the 30 version as well.
Yeah, it's a key part of it.
Key part of the book, yeah. I think this is the best depiction of it, purely because of Felix's acting. So once he's killed the Frenchman, you got the Frenchman gasping for air, dying, and Paul goes through the 7 stages of grief. So
he can't stand it at first, can he?
No, he can't. He can't stand the noise. He wants the guy to be quiet. He's putting his hands over his head. He's trying to stop. He tries to drown the man with mud. And then he feels remorse and he feels grief and he goes over and he tries to save the man. It's just the look on his face, the expressions that Felix musters in this sequence is, if he doesn't get some sort of award nomination for his role alone, I think it'd be a disservice to him, because as a breakout role, I think this movie gets his change. This is why I like the scene. So this is the scene where his reality is brought to him first, because he's gone through this war fighting with his friends, fighting with Kat, with Franz, with Krupp, and then he's on his own and he takes a life on his own. He hasn't got anyone to sort of lean on or move on to the next
and he's
dugout.
Stuck in that trench. There's
and
no movement.
He can't move. He can't escape it. So he has to come to the reality. He has to come to the realisation of what he's doing. And it's where his humanity comes back. And then his humanity leaves him again after that sequence, I feel. And it's only when he's with his friends again that he feels human. And there's this really good sort of exploration of that psyche of his character, which unfortunately the movie didn't do for anyone else, really.
Yeah.
But at least Paul gets this moment where the reality of war comes home to him and he's like, oh my God, this is awful. What have I done? And it's such a striking little sequence. And it's one of the few times in the movie where the movie just does slow to a pace and really gets you in with one sequence.
Yeah,
I really thought it was such a powerful sequence. Yeah. My most affecting scene. I can't say favourite, that's the wrong word.
That's probably the best way of describing it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really powerful.
The lead into that, I think, is equally interesting. So that the tanks are advancing and they futilely try and fire, their rifles at it, which they would have done. They would have definitely done that, and that would have had an effect. So it isn't as futile as it would seem.
Now it does.
That would cause
we have better knowledge of tanks, but for some of these chaps, that's the first time they've ever seen a tank. It could be.
Yeah. It certainly could be. Obviously, I think some people commented that the tanks, the reaction they have to the tanks wouldn't have been as terrified because
No, I
they
don't
would have
think
known
so.
about them for at least 2 years at that point.
Perhaps some of the guys,
but
yes,
that doesn't mean they have individuals have seen the tanks.
Mm.
Doesn't mean they've encountered them before. It doesn't mean doesn't make the tank any less terrifying
Scary.
when it's approaching towards you.
Yeah.
You know, there's like 4 of them firing their 75mm guns and machine guns at you. You're still going to be terrified. And I thought it was really interesting to see them knock out a tank with hand grenades.
Yes,
So
that
they
was, never seen
see
that in
them,
a First World War film before.
Cat throws a stick grenade into the tracks, and then someone posts one through a rifle slit, a machine gun slit, sorry, in the actual side of the tank, and that does the trick. And they managed to knock one out, and that is how Germans knocked out Allied tanks initially.
Yes.
And then they developed Tigerwehr and direct fire artillery became the key ways of knocking tanks out. But I really thought it was interesting that they showed that little sequence of how they could knock a tank out. And
Yeah.
that whole sequence with the tanks and the flamethrowers is very interesting.
Yeah.
Because we see, and it's very effective too, because I think it's Franz is killed by the flamethrower as he's trying to surrender.
Yeah. Burnt alive.
Yeah, and that's kind of horrific. As I said, I think it's interesting that the film showed the shock that the tanks create amongst the Germans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it broke them, didn't it? It broke their advance.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, we have to talk about that sequence where the tank drives across the trench.
Yes. It goes in and comes out, and there's a chap lying there, and he goes to stop.
And Paul watches.
And Paul sees it, and he just gets flattened. You know, in accounts,
screaming underneath
the tracks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've read accounts of people. This is Second World War accounts, but when someone witnessed a German soldier get ran over by a tank, and he said that it's gruesome, listeners, but he said that you'd imagine a body to pop, but it didn't. It just got flattened. And this the movie does that. It doesn't do the uber gruesome thing if you think it's going to be like a guish of blood everywhere.
Yeah. Well, it was incredible to see it on a big screen. It was.
I bet it was
horrific.
Yeah. No. 100%.
And the terror of I can't remember who it is, but I think it's Paul and Kat and someone else, and it runs over the top of their area of the trench.
Yeah.
And they just scream, and you can imagine it. That would totally be how you would react to that. It's terrifying.
I can't think of any other way. But there's something I wanted to mention. I should have mentioned in the alley tally really, but quickly before we move on to some of our gripes that we have, is I felt like this in this world of sort of post Saving Private Ryan era of making war films where everyone's been on a boot camp, everyone's had a military advisor. This movie felt to me that they'd had that, but then somehow I preferred the way that this movie had handled it. So when men are working rifles, when men are fighting, it felt, I'm sure it was choreographed. Yes. I'm sure it was choreographed, but it felt less choreographed than I think we're used to. Like you had chaps that were really working hard to rework bolts, and the franticness of combat.
When Paul is trying to reload as those tanks are approaching and the flamethrower teams are approaching, he is really struggling to get that clip into the action. And so is I think Albert as well. He just can't do it.
Yeah.
He's too scared. He's just too frightened.
And I think it's a sound thing as well. Everything felt really punchy and weighty.
Yeah.
Like it when men got hit, it's not like where people just slump down. People were getting the hit of a bullet felt weighty, like it should.
Yes. The sound design on this film is incredible.
The wind gets knocked out of men when they get hit by a bullet.
It sounds amazing. Another element of that, Rob, jumping off that, is in that opening sequence, the character that we follow is frantically working his bolt.
Yeah.
And he's firing with it out of the shoulder. He's not looking down his sights. He's just firing.
Yeah.
And there's so many accounts of that and studies that have gone into this of men just firingly blind because they know they need to do it, and they're just putting rounds down range as fast as they
I can't think of the statistic off the top of my head, but there's that the Vietnam War statistic of for every X amount of rounds for actual genuine wound made by American, like killing or wounding of an enemy combatant by American soldiers, like the disparity between ammo fired and actual, is incredible. So that is definitely something you read, but I think that's when the movie's at its strongest. So maybe we should go into final thoughts and talk about some things maybe we didn't like, maybe we did.
So I think it's interesting that Berger decided to begin the film in 1917 rather than 1914, where the book and the earlier adaptations begin, because it cuts out a significant portion of context, and we join Paul in this fervor of he's at school, he's gonna sign his parents' name for them so he can join the rest of his mates going off to the front.
Yeah.
And then they're on the back of a lorry at one point singing This Time Next Year in Paris, which by 1917 I'm not sure the fervency and the belief in that would have been as strong as it was in 1914.
See, it depends where because if it's the Kaiserschlacht, if it's that part, if that is what they're going for, that works. Especially if it's showing the naivety of them. I didn't mind that
exactly,
as much.
And it illustrates that really nicely. But I thought it was really interesting that they decided to do that, because in a way that might even be a reference to Remarque's own experience. He joined in 1917,
sure, and
fought through to until he was wounded in early 1918, I think. So maybe that's what they were drawing from, but it kind of affects the chronology of the film in a way that stunts it towards the end, where they try and cram a hell of a lot into like 4 days.
Yeah. The pacing and timing is a little bit quick.
Yes,
I think. Yeah, and because before we started recording, you had to remind me that when they steal that goose, it's only like a couple of months later when they try and steal that goose again, and Kat gets mortally wounded, and I was like, well, hang on, I thought that was in 1916 or 1917. Because of how I thought, well, that can't possibly be that close. It was jarring to me a little bit.
It's a little tricky because they do put updates on the screen. And give you some idea of that, but the chronology is a little bit compressed for me.
Yeah, and I just felt that was to just keep reminding the viewer who maybe not be as clued up on the First World War, being like, oh, remember it's so close to the end of the war. It was this whole thing of the 11th of November's coming. How's this going to go? Because we know the war's going to end, and we know it, but the characters don't. That's what I thought. It was that whole where we know and they don't type thing.
I thought another element, I'll circle back to some of the things I liked in a moment, because there's plenty I did like about the film.
Of course.
I thought that Kat and Paul's deaths, which are remarkably changed from the actual source material, were a little bit jarring, and the final battle as well is jarring, because the final battle doesn't appear in the source material or in any of the films. That final battle is almost like they're trying to force home the
madness,
the pointlessness. The madness and pointlessness of it.
Yeah, I did. I got that too, but I think it was.
And I know they're referencing
things that did happen,
fighting that was ongoing.
Yeah.
On the last day of the war.
Yeah, there were guys that were killed after, weren't there? The armistice was signed. Yeah. But I didn't mind it as much. Because I felt like the ending of this one was stronger than the 79 version that I've seen more. I've only saw the 30s version years back. But I think the 79 version for me, it ends too abruptly, whereas I prefer the way that this built up to the death, and it continued the themes of just like how apathetic Paul is going into that battle. He's just resigned to it, and after seeing all his friends die, you get the feeling that he doesn't care about death anymore. He doesn't care about surviving anymore. Wrote it. Yeah,
he isn't supposed to give a shit about his own safety in life anymore. He's lost that essence of humanity almost, and the way that the films end with him reaching out or looking out towards a butterfly or a bird. I think it's a butterfly in the 30s version.
It's a bird in the 79. Yeah,
in the 79 version. The 22 version of this film loses all of that poignancy of him being almost resigned to death and a loss of humanity. He sees something beautiful, and he's so struck by it he forgets all danger.
Yeah,
and he's shot.
I'm. This is probably the first time we don't agree. on the rare times we don't align. Because that ending in 79 for me is too twee. Because he seems too cheerful when he's writing his. You hear his letter.
Yeah, I'm not saying the 79 version is the best version.
Oh no, I didn't take it as that.
I think that the him seeing something beautiful and almost becoming distracted, or he wants to die. You could read it that way too.
Yeah, no, get it. Yeah,
it's a little bit more poignant.
I suppose it's also worth remembering that the endings of the other two films are also like significant adaptations, small but significant, to the book, which doesn't actually describe him being killed. If I remember rightly, it just says that he dies on a quiet day.
But I know what you'll say in a moment about that ending, and I completely agree with you that the way he dies in this film has its own poignancy.
Yes, but it could have had so much more. So, because in this one, obviously, we mentioned earlier, he has a fight with the French guy. Then they roll into a dugout together.
Yeah,
and he looks like they're going to duke it out to the bitter end. You know, the minutes of the First World War remaining. The armistice can be.
It almost looks like they're going to stop fighting and talk.
Yeah, and they engage in eye contact, and Paul stops, and he has this surprised look on his face, as if he's like, I can't believe what we're doing right now. And it's a moment of clarity, and I really loved it. And the French guy's looking at him, and it's like, what are they going to do? They're going to charge at each other? Is the movie going to cut to black? What the hell's going to happen? And then it really got me, because I'm obviously you're locked on Paul, and then you see him react, and he gets a French bayonet through the heart.
Yeah,
I liked it because it was it's mirroring earlier when he stabbed the French man in the heart. You know, it's like you live by you knife someone to death, you get the same back. It's that whole thing of you've killed in a movie and you shouldn't have killed, so you will be killed.
It's film karma.
It's film tropey karma, but it works. And then you get this beautiful shot of here he slumps to his knees, and you get this beautiful shot, and I'll put a screen grab up of it on the Twitter, and it's him on his knees. He's blacked out, silhouetted, and you've got the dugout entrance, and it's white light, and it hangs on that for maybe 10-15 seconds, and it's a beautiful piece of cinematography. I really think it is.
I thought it would end there.
I did. I thought it would end there, and then here's when my gripes come in, because it cuts away to a clock that shows 11 a.m. and you get a little sequence of chaps wandering around dazed. You've got guys sort of like letting German troops go back to their own lines. There's a point where someone
shouts, "It's over."
Well, that's
it's 11
that bit.
a.m.
Yeah, that bit. Once,
and you're like, would they really have done that in the kind of fighting that they're engaged in?
Yeah, because Paul's been stabbed at that point, and you hear that. Yeah. You hear, it's 11 a.m. And I'm like, oh, for God's sake, come on, that's a bit much. It's a bit ham-fisting. Mm-hmm. Ham-fisted.
Very on the nose.
Very on the nose. And then we cut back to Paul, and he's somehow got the strength to go up the dugout and go outside and die in the air and die in the light. And that for me was too much. I think you missed your part. You missed your chance to have that meaningless death, which I think in the 79 and 30 version, that is what it's going for. It's this meaningless death. Because all of them die a meaningless death, don't they? All of them do.
Yeah.
But
there's no heroes in this film.
No heroes, no. But for Paul, it's like, if he'd have waited if the French guy behind him waited a couple of minutes, if he'd have waited a couple of minutes, he'd be dead, he'd be alive. But I don't like the way that it goes. And then to have my second gripe, which is perhaps my biggest one, actually. What the hell is Daniel Brühl's other film doing in this movie? It feels like a fan edit. I can't not mention it. Because you get Daniel Brühl in it, and he's in the train carriages trying to sign the treaty of, the treaty to do the armistice treaty. Yeah. It feels like a fan edit. It feels like someone's made a Treaty of Versailles film, and you've cut it in.
The way it struck me is that it either needed more or it needed to be cut completely. Because there's a little bit of context of him being handed a report saying this is how many have died today, which is okay. And then he goes into a meeting which you don't see with the German High Command. The officers are seen in their briefing room in the headquarters through a door. He goes in, the door closes, and that's the first introductory scene with Brühl. And then we see him on the train headed to the negotiations, the famous negotiations inside the train carriage in the woods. And I was quite excited to see this. I thought, this is great. This hasn't really been done in any great detail in other films. This is going to be an interesting element to the film. But there's so much context and just exposition that is forced in around that, where it explains that we're losing too many men. The people are going to mutiny. And none of it's shown. It's all just said.
It's exposition,
which is
done.
fine.
Yeah,
it is. But it's rushed, I think, is one of my main complaints with this, because we see the negotiations. Brühl is portrayed as being someone who wants to end the bloodshed right now, and the French are portrayed as being unmoving, unwilling to compromise, there's definitely an element of truth to that, and they're shown as being very vengeful in the peace that they want. And I get the feeling that while there's truth to that, a lot more of that comes later at Versailles, where the actual peace is negotiated, and there's almost throughout some of the sequences with Brühl and the French, and with Friedrichs, the German general?
That's it. Yeah.
Who is talking about, because he's the archetypal Prussian general. And it's really interesting to see that portrayed. And I think you could go into detail and depth about
that's
just talking about the way he's portrayed.
Yeah, all these people are interesting, but they're not. It's too much for this.
Well, they're not fleshed out, and they can't be, because they can't. Exactly. They haven't got time to flesh out the main cast, and they don't want to do, which I'll talk about.
Yeah, because I know you're doing an adaptation, and it's a very loose adaptation in places. But then I'm thinking, yeah, but this isn't in the original anyway, so that's why it feels so out of place.
Give Brühl his armistice negotiations film.
Yeah, do that.
Because you could do it. I'd watch that.
Because I think I'd like to see
there's a story to tell there on its own.
There is 100%. I'd like to see a fan cut of this movie with those sequences taken out, and even take out the parts with the general. I don't think you need all of his backstory either. Just show his speech, because I think that's enough. I don't think you need anything else from him.
They're setting him up as this archetypal Prussian officer who is nothing but a soldier and knows nothing other than soldiering.
Yeah.
And he's hell-bent on winning a final victory before the peace is declared.
And that's enough.
Which is his nightmare.
Yeah, that's enough. Just show him saying to the chaps, you could go and do what I say.
Yeah. It's a little ham-fisted, but it's in there. That takes me to my main issue with this. At this point in the war, we are during the 100 Days offensives, where the Allies have been chasing German field forces for about 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
The Germans are in full retreat. They've broken at the Hindenburg line, and they're falling back through Belgium at this point of the war.
Yep.
The line is fluid, more fluid than the stalemate of the middle of the war, which is effectively what they're kind of portraying with this. And the original film deals with that because the chronology is extended.
Sure.
And the original book, because those initial battles were, well, the central piece battles of the earlier adaptations of this, they're ostensibly set in during the German spring offensive and a little bit after. So the stalemate that gets shown kind of works more, I think. Whereas in this, they wouldn't have been in such fixed trench lines because the Germans were in retreat. So I think, of course, there's parts of the line that wouldn't have been, and we can just headcanon and say that part of the line hadn't moved as much. But there's no real mention of why the war is ending for Germany. There's no real mention of...
Yeah, they take all that,
We're losing a lot of men, but they're not explaining why they're losing a lot of men.
Yeah,
they're losing a lot of men because their cohesion is broken, the Allies are on the offensive, and their line is collapsing and they're falling back and they're taking huge casualties.
Yeah, they take all that time to show the treaty being signed, but then they don't do the stuff, they don't explain the stuff you think they would. You know?
Yes.
If you'd had an exposition dump of Brühl's character being like, oh, still retreating, are we? Oh, better stop this before we lose all of our boys. You know, it's just a simple little bit of dialogue, surely.
If you did a film around the negotiations and the collapse of the Imperial German Army and the government at the time, that would be fascinating because you'd have Hindenburg, you'd have the Social Democrats, the wranglings between them, and the final realization that they had to seek an armistice.
100%.
And the reasons behind it, the blockade, people are starving, the Navy's mutinying, the Kaiser's abdicated. It's collapsing. There isn't a Germany for them anymore. It's falling apart as the war is collapsing and ending. But I don't think we get a real sense of that.
And this isn't the right film to do it in either. No.
This film should be about the personal experience of the frontline soldier.
And then that's where my third gripe comes in, is as good as those sequences are, cut them, personally, but then it shouldn't take you 50 minutes of your 2.5 hour movie to get into Paul's character as much as you do in that crater sequence. Because until that time, that's the thing about that, the first 40 minutes is that really quick sequence where he gets into the army. Then you got this really quick sequence where they're at the front and the dugout falls in on them. And then you get a little bit where they're going and find reinforcements. But in none of that time do we ever get to know these characters properly. They get snatches and snippets of dialogue here. It's not enough for me to care enough. That maybe that's the point of it. That, you know, showing the shortness of their careers at the front line, showing how fleeting life was on the front for some people. I understand that. And perhaps they're not going for that traditional arc, traditional characterisation. That's fine.
Yeah.
But Paul is the only character that is fleshed out between the guys. And then you get a little bit of Kat. I would have preferred having a little bit more of Kat and just a little bit less. I feel like
we get more of Kat than we do of Paul.
You do?
Because we learn about his son that has died of smallpox before the war. Oh, he's got a wife. He's a cobbler. There's a social class element where they discuss what they'll be like after the war. Paul says we'll have to do something big after the war, and Kat just kind of goes quiet and cuts him down and says, Paul, I can't read. I'm a cobbler. You're educated. You need to go to college and do the best you can. And that was a really telling scene. And I felt like we got more of Kat there, and we got a lot of Kat when he's having the letter read to him by Paul as well.
Yes,
we did. Honestly, I do right. Kind of feel like in sort of scripted context, we get more of Kat than we do of Paul.
Yeah, it felt like a brother. Now you mentioned it, it did feel like a brother relationship at certain points. But yeah, it's just that small little thing there of I wish they had have taken a little bit more time with these boys, because I would have felt more at the end, and that's the thing. The only one I felt for when they died was was Paul, because you'd seen him break, and you'd seen him break and rebuild himself, break again, and then die. But with the rest of them, you hadn't. And Kat's, just quickly, we have to mention it, Kat's death is bollocks in this.
Yeah. So in the book and in the other adaptations, he's killed by a shrapnel splinter, which I think hits him in the head and kills him pretty quickly.
Leg, isn't it? Yeah, I can't remember.
Well, I think it varies. I think it might actually vary. It might be leg in, because they carry him in the 79 version, don't they?
Yes, that's in the...
Or they try to. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He's hit by shrapnel, and that's what kills him. And that is a completely different death to what's in this.
Yeah, so in this one, they've stolen that goose before. They've both got away with it. They both enjoy this goose. And then the war's coming to an end now.
The goose scene's nice.
Yeah, the goose is lovely. It's great. It's
one
nice
of the few bonding sequences they have, and that's very short, but at least it's there. It's good.
Yeah. So then they go and steal this goose again because they want to celebrate the end of the war with who they've got left of their friendship group. And they go and steal the goose. No bother. They don't get a goose this time. They get some eggs. And you see the farmer come out with his gun again, takes pot shots at the boys and misses. And then this child, the farmer's child, comes out of nowhere. And you see him, he stares at the boys bleakly, and then it cuts. And then Paul and Kat enjoy some eggs. And then Kat's in a forest having a whiz. And the boy comes out of absolutely nowhere and just shoots Kat.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, like, that happened. Why did that happen? There's no previous motive set up for this boy. He's only in it once. You know, I had to make some ridiculous headcanon to make that work. You know, my thoughts were being, oh, okay, they stole the goose before, and the boy went hungry, his family went hungry or some crap, and now he's having it. He's just going to have his revenge on Kat for stealing the goose, but that's not enough. There, you had
he's representing the
film theory,
the revenge of the French people against the pillaging and ransacking of his country by the German army.
That works, Matt, but it's such an odd death for him. If the farmer had killed him, that would have been fine.
Yeah,
because you could have had so much discussions there. You could have said, you know, all this fighting to be killed by a farmer. You know, like that could have been interesting for the movie, but to have the son. I don't know. I think it could be something about the innocence of youth or something being lost again. It's just so much. It's too much to dig into.
It's another element of pointlessness of war, because Paul carries him back to the hospital. He tries to flag down some passing lorries. Tell you what, the German army is very mechanized in this film. Not a lot of horses, but I think there's like 3 horses, which is definitely not representative of the reality at that point. But he gets into the hospital and he's already died. And the doctor is typical film doctor, where he's nonchalant about death because he experiences so much of it. And that's a pretty common characterization, and probably quite accurate to a degree. Tells him it's black blood, it's from his liver, he's poisoned, he's dead.
Brown bread.
Yeah, and it's I feel for Paul in that moment because he's alone. And it's a hard moment because in the film, in the previous films, and possibly in the book, Kat dies when some of the original group are still alive, if I remember rightly. I think there's at least one person that's still alive, but I might be misremembering that. It's been a little while. But it's interesting. I found the deaths of Paul and Kat, the changes that were made, really jarring. I wanted to touch on something that Rob S. said on Twitter, who's a German. He noted that the writers of the film in German took a lot of care with German regional dialects and character traits. And a lot of that is lost in the translation that Netflix provides. And he said a lot of the lack of character depth about which many of the English-speaking viewers have complained is perhaps because these nuances that are in the language are lost in the translation.
That's a complete fair assessment, yeah.
And I have no way of gauging that. There's a few bits where we talked about this earlier, but there's a few bits where we thought that the translation was a little curtailed, a little too specific in places.
Yeah, it's such a small thing. Like, because I got a small grasp of German, and there's some subtitles that don't completely. I know you don't have to do a complete translation, but there's just some words I'm thinking, well, that's not what that word is. You've just just put, like, you've truncated that at the end of a sentence for no reason. Yeah, it's just small things. But no, I can totally get it being lost. And just to remind the listeners, we watched German version with subtitles, so
yeah, we didn't watch the dub.
we didn't watch the dub.
No.
Netflix dubs are just trash anyway for me.
Just dubs in general always just take me out of the moment. I'm much more distracted by the dub than I am reading subtitles. What also disappointed me is we lose the training sequences of them training, and that is again a detriment to character development. So we lose completely Sergeant Himmelstrasse, their nightmare drill sergeant, who then arrives on the front line when things become so desperate. Remember that from the 79 version, yeah. Yeah, Ian Holm plays him brilliantly, and he has his comeuppance when he finally gets into battle. Paul's the hardened soldier at that point, and Himmelstrasse has, never experienced that kind of war.
Yeah. Well, I think, juxtaposing you there, I didn't mind that. I like the fact it just thrust these boys into the front line. I thought that was good, affecting enough. Yeah. Because how many training camp sequences do we need to see in films? There's a lot of them. True.
That is true.
That's just me though. That I get it.
No, I can get behind that. That is an element of that. But again, it does remove some of that opportunity for character development.
Yet again, you are right. Yeah.
But that's not to say there isn't character development there. And I think there's more than people give the film credit for, because I feel it when both Kat and Paul die. I feel it when, is it Jardin who stabs his neck in the hospital?
Yeah.
I felt that deeply. I thought that was tragic. And I thought that whole sequence was really well handled with, they take soup for him. There's that bit that's in the book where the cook says, I've cooked for 200 men. There's only 85 of you here. And they take soup to him, and he asks them if they brought cutlery. And as they're eating their soup because they're starving themselves, he takes the fork and stabs his neck because he knows he's going to die, or he's going to be maimed, and he can't continue to be maimed.
He wants to be a ranger, doesn't he, after?
He does, yeah. Yeah. And that bit is very affecting. As much an anti-war film as any of the others, and as the actual source material is, but it's in the most direct way possible. It's like, look at this abhorrent situation that men have created and men have been thrust into.
Yeah,
it dispenses with character development almost to the point of no return. But I think it does focus down on the two characters as we've talked about, and we're supposed to experience the war through them. And I feel the deaths, the losses.
They hit the hardest
of them.
Yeah.
Because we know them the best. So there is character development there, but it's very subtle.
I'd forgotten Crook had died until the end when you see his bit of poster again. I'd forgotten he died.
Yeah. Well, he's lost it.
Yeah. If you hadn't have Fran's scarf, I would forget Franz had died.
Well, Franz is his interactions with those French girls is the only nod to those French girls being in the.
Oh, I'm glad they cut that, because in a way, it's just it keeps you in the war. It keeps you in that part of it. I know people are annoyed because he doesn't have his furlough bit. He doesn't see how different things are at home,
and he doesn't have the interaction with his parents. Yeah, and that is very effective.
Well, I like the fact it kept it where it kept it.
Yeah, it's utilitarian. It is. But to sum up, I love the sound design. I love the ominous score. I love the costuming and the practical effects. The acting was fabulous.
Yep.
Despite the fact that it changes so much from the source material, I can accept that. I think it would have been better, perhaps without the negotiation elements, or perhaps even if it had been released under a different name, because so much is different from the source material. It could have been inspired by.
You're one of them people.
I am. It could have been. I'm not. I don't mind that it was released under the All Quiet on the Western Front mark. But it could have easily.
God, you could have easily been different characters. People chop and change things all the fucking time. God, trying to do a drama degree. We've got to make it fresh.
Different characters, different title. It could have been because it's just really different. It's a grim depiction of war, but it feels really authentic.
Yes.
And it has the same anti-war message, but it delivers it in a much more stark utilitarian way. But in the end, it has the same goal and same effect as the original source material, I think, in that it shows what war can do to individuals.
Yeah, I'd go for that. I agree with you with the cutting of... I say get rid of Brühl's part and make that into its own thing, because it's good enough. Because there's some terrific writing in those sequences that is wasted. I just... And then I wish maybe... keep it as is, but maybe have a few scenes where the guys chat to each other a little bit more. Because there's only a couple of those. And apart from that, I did really enjoy it. I think the cinematography, some of the best cinematography I've seen in a war film up till now.
Do you know, I was thinking about this earlier, and the cinematography and the way that it depicts the war reminds me so much of the work of Otto Dix, a German artist who was a soldier during the war.
Yeah.
And his stark, horrific and like totally unflinching depictions of war.
There's a lot of Kubrickian perspective shots as well, which I really liked.
Yeah.
Really nice. And just some of the framing of the shots as well. I think I do think the part of him on his knees in the dugout is where it should have ended, because that is a beautiful scene.
That would have been a poignant end.
Yeah.
Him being found by the recruit that he sort of saves.
That circle thing, it's too much.
Yeah, I don't think it was needed. And the recruit takes the scarf.
It's too on the nose of him saving the youth of innocence. Again, it's too over the head. I don't need it. Give me some agency as a viewer. Make me think a bit more. I don't need to be spoon-fed. This isn't a Marvel film. I don't need to be fucking handheld through it. This is an adaptation of an anti-war seminal novel. I don't need you to fucking hold my hand and beat me with tropes. And luckily, this film doesn't do it as much.
No, it's not.
But I would recommend it.
The guiltiest.
I just think it's not 100% the movie that some people want it to be. For me, I think it's...
Yes, I would agree.
It's better than 1917. I think that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, I'd say it's grittier.
Much, yeah.
And I like the
much
message
less gimmicky as well.
It is, it is. I would agree there too. Not that I didn't like 1917. We can talk about that when we finally review 1917.
Yeah, fine. Do that in 2017.
I mean, compared to another World War One movie, which we've touched in a show and tell episode, was The Rifleman.
Yes, I've seen a few people liking Europe. It to that. Yeah.
And it's some of the combat scenes are, akin to that, and it works really well. And The Rifleman has a very human element to it as well.
It does. I think you can put this on a par with 2017's Journey's End as the two best First World War films in the West
of the 21st century.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and it's good. Yeah, I'm interested to see how it's going to do.
There's a special right there discussing 21st century depictions of World War One.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Get a round table for that one.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, that's one of my long-term concepts for the show. To do round tables. Anyway, no, I enjoyed it. I'm glad that Netflix are backing movies like this. If they're going to do more of that. Please keep doing it.
I hope that it has the effect of engaging with people, shocking people, making people want to go and read the novel, find out more about the end of the war.
Yeah.
People don't appreciate how the war ended in the field.
Yeah.
For me, as a child, I often thought that it was stalemate till the end. I didn't realise there was... Until I studied it, there was so much movement and the fluidity and the retreat and the offensives. That isn't necessarily reflected in this film, but we can't have everything.
Well, no, but at least we got something, and at least it wasn't a complete pile of trash, because it would have been such a shame.
I hope we get more films off the back of this of an equal caliber, because this is very good. Adapt Remarque sequel.
Yeah,
way back.
Do that. Make a modern remake of that. Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Hit us up on the Twitter or the Facebook if you've got any thoughts. And as always, you can visit fightingonfilm.com to catch the entire back catalogue of the film, starting from episode 1. If you have a FOF binge, do let us know. And we'll catch you next week.
Thanks, guys. Bye.